Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video we're gonna do something a bit new that I wanted to try out, which is gonna be a follow-up to the last Shadow Priest guide I did. Now this guide will be mostly aimed towards pushing M+ as a Shadow Priest. Now Shadow Priest right now state in M+ is, I'd say, around tier A, B tier, something like that. So it's not that bad. It's not the best either. It has a few strengths, but its weaknesses are stopping it from reaching any higher. Shadow Priest is really strong for a bunch of reasons, and I hope to give you guys some background as to what those strengths and weaknesses are going to be, so you can use those to get higher score. So the point of this video is I'm going to talk about talents, specific builds that you might not know about that work for specific weeks like Fortified or Bolstering or Tyrannical and such things. Well, I'll also be covering some stuff with conduits, covenants, because there's a bit of a difference in the covenants depending on what you play, but overall I'll be taking into account that you actually have played the spec quite a bit before. So if you don't have too much experience with Shadow Priest, make sure to check out my previous guide, which will be in the description down below, and will give you a basic understanding as long as you play with it a bit. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this vid. Make sure to like, thumbs up, and subscribe if you like the content I make, and we'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you enjoy. Alright guys, so as always, firstly we're going to talk about talents. Now I'm not going to go into depth as I usually do, explaining what each talent does and why they're good or why they might be bad. Instead, I'm just gonna show you the builds, tell you where these tend to be used, and that's gonna be it for talents, as well as some explanation behind some of the affixes and why some talents are good on certain weeks compared to other weeks. So firstly, first row, Fortress of the Mind, tyrannical pick most of the time, can be also really good for Fortified. Depends on what kind of affixes. Something like Bolstering, for example, I'd take Fortress of the Mind any day. But for the rest, I tend to go with Death and Madness, especially on an explosive week like this week, because explosives can be used for you to just fuel sanity back every time you use your execute on them, as well as using your legendary Prism onto it to keep your pet longer and do a lot more damage. So here, really dependent, as I said. I tend to go Death and Madness if it's tyrannical, Fortress of the Mind. Second row, these are all viable options, but Body and Soul is most of the time the way to go. Just because it gives us speed, something we don't have as a priest, something we lack a majority of the time. So I recommend Body and Soul, but there are some really good plays you can do with Sand Lane and Intangibility if you don't have enough survivability. Next up, we have the third row. Third row has two options. Misery. Practically, it's only for Theater of Pain, and then Searing Nightmare, which is for all the other dungeons, because it's uncapped AoE and you want that, especially as you go higher into the keys. But Misery for Theater of Pain is a must, because Searing Nightmare will see no damage done on in that dungeon. Okay, so next up, CC row. So for the CC row, Last Word and Psychic Aura tend to be the go-tos. Why Last Word, you might ask? Well, Last Word is great if your team already has a bunch of stuns. Let's say you're playing with a Hunter, a Warlock, or something that already has stun, as well as you have a Shaman Healer, for example, who also has an AoE stun. Well, you don't particularly want another stun, because that's just gonna be diminishing returned a majority of the time with the other people's stun. So Last Word can be good, but majority of the time you'll go with Psychic Aura, unless, like I said, you have a lot of stuns, like you have a Paladin tank, you have a Shaman Healer, you have, I don't know, a Warrior that can stun as well, like you have a bunch of specs that can stun. Majority of the time that won't be the case, because as Shadow Priest, well, playing with a mage is just ideal, because we get a lot more value than most other specs from the intellect. Okay, so next up we have big damage AoE row. So Auspicious Spirits, Fit of Pain, practically the only dungeon you'll ever use Auspicious Spirits, and Shadow Crash. That's for the rest of the dungeons. Big AoE burst, gives you insanity even on single target. Just a really good talent. So I would always recommend Shadow Crash unless it's Fit of Pain. Now, you might be asking, why is Fit of Pain so special? Well, Fit of Pain has 5 bosses, and a majority of the packs are made for you, so that means The only times where you might pull big are really risky pulls that you'd only do if the timer is really tight, or if the key is high enough that you need to do these pulls in order to time the key. So a majority of the time you'll go Spicious Spirits, because Shadowcross is just not good for free man packs, as opposed to like constant good damage and insanity generation. Next talent depends on what legendary you're using. Mindbender, a majority of the time, because you'll be playing Prism, right? Some Necros might decide to go for the Necrolord's specific legendary, and then you go Void Torrent. Maybe if, like, for example, you build your legendary to 262 for Rigding, then I can see this being good. But generally, Mindbender is just insane, and, well, there's no reason to swap out a good legendary, is there? So, yeah. But Void Torrent can see play as well. It's a pretty close one. But with the legendary, Mindbender is insane, as well as with a Conduit that increases its attack speed. Next up, last row. Okay, so here's the juicy stuff. Ancient Madness is great for a big burst AoE, and usually I play Ancient Madness because it's a lot more fun than the others. That said, Hungering Void can also be used in every single dungeon. Aside for Fate of Pain, where I always play Hungering Void, there's just no questions asked. Hungering Void is just insane in Fate of Pain because of the amount of priority damage you have to do and the fact that there's 5 bosses. Surrender to Madness, if you wish to give PI to someone else, I'd play Surrender to Madness. It gives you a Void Form on every Mindbender, and it gives you Void Form on every Necrolord ability you get. That said, if you're not a Necrolord, still the same thing, you still use it along with Mindbender, because most of the Covenants will want to play with Prism anyway, as legendary. So, last row, really depending on what you want to do. Hungering Void can work for every single dungeon as well, but I tend to go Ancient Madness, because it's more fun for me. That said, go for any of them. Try them out, I'd say, because it takes a bit of time to get used to the playstyle of each of them. So that was it with talents. Alright guys, next up let's talk Soulbind and Conduit. Now when it comes to Necrolord, because I'm a Necrolord, I'll speak of Necrolord first, and then I'll speak of Night Fae. And maybe a bit about Kyrian. Not too sure about how Venthyr works, so I won't go too much into depth with that, but I'm pretty sure they run the first Soulbind they get, if I'm correctly. But outside of that, on the first one for Necrolord, you will want to run Bonesmith Aemir, because Bonesmith Aemir is the best out of the 3 when it comes to doing AoE. The reason for this is Aimir's Arsenal Marrowed Gemstone. After landing 10 critical strikes, you gain 18% increased chance to critical strike for 10 seconds, which goes hand to hand with a passive we have. If you let me find it real quick, Shadowy Apparitions. Critical strikes will cause 2 apparitions to be created, which is actually really good. Not only this, but crit just increases your damage by a whole bunch, so imagine going to Void Form with that up, and also your talent that I mentioned earlier, Ancient Madness. 30% plus that, we're roughly at 48% crit, which is huge, and will just overall increase your damage by a lot. So, what else is there to speak about? Well, Conduits. Conduits is really dependent on what dungeon you're playing. So Theater is once again the special snowflake out of all of them, because Theater is the one where you want the most single target, and you'll be running Dissonant Echoes almost every time. For the rest, if you're playing Ancient Madness or Surrender to Madness, there's no reason to play Dissonant Echoes, as you won't be getting any value from it whatsoever compared to the other choices. If you're playing Prism, you always play Rabid Shadows, because Rabid Shadows just does a bunch of damage when you summon your Mindbender. For example, over here, you can see that my melee for my Mindbender is actually on the meters. It's 8% of my damage, which is insane for a 1 minute cooldown, and overall will just increase your damage. So, next up, we have Haunting Apparitions. Shadowy Apparitions deal more damage. Just the best one out of the lot. So those are the 3 choices you tend to go for when it comes to Conduits. Mind Devourer is an interesting one. I've tried it as well, especially for a key like Theta. I've already tried it with Plague Divisor, but the thing is, if you want to play Mind Devourer, you have to sacrifice either Rabid Shadows, or you have to sacrifice Haunting Apparition, which, I don't know, it doesn't feel as good as sacrificing, for example, the Sudden Echoes and just playing 2 Potency Conduits, which is what you do as a Necrol the majority of the time. That said, next up, let's talk Night Fae. So Night Fae, you play Dreamweaver. That's just it. You play Dreamweaver and you get a lot of value. And if you Night Fae, you tend to go majority of the time Hungering Void, because Hungering Void will actually get a lot more value. Your Potency Conduits will lead to better Soulbind usage on Dreamweaver. So when it comes to Kyrian, you want to be playing Pelagos, and Ventfae, I'm quite sure you go with Nadina. This season it's Nadina, I'm pretty sure, but don't quote me on that because it might also be Feda. It depends on which content it is. So lastly, the last thing I want to talk about is legendaries when it comes to like preparing before I do an explanation on the dungeon. I'm going to run through so you guys have an idea. Legendary wise, Prism, if you haven't heard of that legendary yet, you need to craft it. It's just an insane legendary. It deals a bunch of damage to up to 5 targets every time you use Mind Blast or you execute Shadow at Death while Mindbender is up, or the other variation of Mindbender, which is Shadow Fiend. But you never play Shadow Fiend because you want more frequent Shadow Fiends, which results in Mindbender. So that's great and all. Is there any other choices? Well, not really, to be honest. Like right now, about every single Covenant, even Kyrian, plays Mindbender Prism. So there's not really much space for room to talk about here. The only other choice I've seen some people run is the legendary from Necrolords, specific to Necrolords, which basically summons a little mage that does a bunch of damage on single target and is the best in slot for Necrolords in raiding. Now this can work as well on tyrannical bosses, I guess, but generally just go Prism. It's the safest option, everyone plays it, it does more damage than any other one, so just play it practically. That's it for Soulbinds and Conduits. Finesse and Endurance, you get to play 3 of them in the majority of the cases, so just don't play Charitable Soul, it's pretty much worthless. And Finesse is a question of which one do you like the most. I really like gripping people around as a priest, so Move with Grace is just my pick. But outside of that, that's it for those. Alright guys, so for the last part of this video, what I wanted to do was look at a recording I did from a dungeon and basically just go over it, which is gonna be not the entire dungeon because Sanguine Depth is a huge ass dungeon, but this one was a really good example of some tricks you can learn, and then plus that will help you, especially with the explosive affix being up right now. It's a really good one for Shadow Priest and really makes us shine, which is something that a lot of people don't know about. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically walk you through some of the stuff I do, some of the stuff you want to do as a Shadow Priest. Now I may still make some mistake, I haven't watched this yet, I don't particularly remember making any, but we'll see about that. So let's go right into it. So hey, yeah, if you're a Void Elf, you can use your Spatial Rift along with your Fade and Mind Soothe to skip these guys without wasting a pot, which is gonna be huge for you. So then you can use it on the boss before that, or you can use it on the mobs here. So the first thing you want to do when entering a pack like this, you don't particularly have a lot of time to put your Vampiric Embrace, because this type of pack is one you want it to die instantly, basically. So I put Vampiric Touch on Cal because she's the main target, but for those little ads, it's not worth putting Vampiric Touch. They're gonna die in like what, 10-15 seconds. Really not worth putting Vampiric Touch on them, because by the time you would have done that, the rest of the group will have killed it, and that would have just been a waste of your burst and your damage overall. So here what I did is the Mindbender along with the Necrol ability, which does a bunch of damage and also increases your damage due to Mastery. So it's another like 10%, well for me it was like, I think it's roughly 14% increased damage done to those targets. Always keep Vampiric Touch on Cal, because Cal is the main target. Not worth to keep your other dots, Vampiric Touch on the other targets. Especially if raging, because your tank really wants to kite here. And as you can see, I kill a lot of explosives. Explosives is basically a source of damage for us. It's like a gift from the heavens. Like, it gives us a bunch of damage when you have Mindbender up, and it also gives you like insanity generation. I'm always at 100% sanity almost, so it's pretty nice. I get to use some Devouring Plagues here and there, and here it's roughly gonna be the same. I can't remember, do I burst it? Probably. Or do I burst it next? So we bring it to the cage for the buffs. Yeah, and here I basically start bursting. Use Ruby. By the way, Ruby is the go-to trinket. There's not many other trinkets that actually work. I've tried a bunch of them, and Ruby really is the way to go. So here we just pump. We do a bunch of damage. Really have to watch out though. The ad starts to rage, so the caster's casts really starts to deal a bunch of damage. Here we take a bunch of damage. We're completely fine. And as you can see, we do a lot of damage overall. So those explosives, once again, just killing them, because with this type of comp, although a hunter is pretty good for it as well, they still lose a lot more value, while we gain value while killing these explosives, which is just insane. So you want to be doing that a majority of the time. It takes some practice to get used to, but really worth doing. Also, one thing you want to be doing, so here you can't see it because the healer doesn't get to drink that much, but if you're playing with a healer that needs to drink a little bit more than usual, then gripping them after their drink, when they reach like 70% or 80% into the next pack, so they don't need to run that much, is always a good thing to do and a smart choice. It will help out your group a lot, specifically your healer, and also make it easier to just not waste time. It's a few seconds, even if the heal doesn't do that much damage, it's still a few seconds you win by doing so. One other thing I want to mention actually is Vampiric Embrace. Vampiric Embrace is a really strong cooldown that you want to be using. So here I didn't really get that much of a chance to use it because we're not taking that much damage. But let's say we were taking a lot more damage and the group is roughly at like, what, 60%? And the healer might not have any cooldowns, then Vampiric Embrace is actually one of the biggest cooldowns. Sometimes, even when the healer dies, Vampiric Embrace can sustain a group long enough for the healer to come back, or for you to just finish the pack off. Now, less true when it comes to this type of affix. So I may just getting yeeted here, that's fine, didn't die at least, but yeah, so Vampiric Embrace, a cooldown you use if your healer died, or if your healer just is struggling heavily, because you will just do a lot of passive healing through it, and you might end up saving your group a wipe, or just save up your tank, which is good enough, either way. It's a lot of value from a DPS spec. So next up we're gonna reach the boss. I think we overpulled here. I think the tank might have mispulled earlier and pulled the guy that starts walking after the first boss, and you have to cross the bridge. The guy that just patrols over. Somehow I might have pulled that. So here we just murder these, and then we go on to the last boss and basically have some fun. Fun fact: the traps you see here, once these mobs are dead, you can actually walk into the traps without taking damage. It might give some anxiety to the rest of the group if they don't know about it, but worth it. As a priest, it's your job, so yeah, do that. And now we're reaching the last boss. So on single target right now, so I was communicating with the mage. I was like, dude, just don't use your lust yet, just use it a bit later, so I get to get my burst, my pot and everything together and do a lot of damage. Because as a Shadow Priest, you do a big amount of instantaneous single target burst. Now, I was playing Ancient Madness, so my sustainable single target isn't as good, but the instant burst itself is better because of the 30% Vampiric. So when it comes to Cal, specifically this boss, she has this mechanic where she charges people, and when you're playing Shadow Priest and you're playing Void Elf once again, you can actually racial out of it, even if it's the first one. Now, I don't think I managed to pull it off this time, but it is possible to do. So that's a cool thing to keep in mind, because that mechanic does a bunch of damage. The other thing you gotta keep in mind as well is the second one when she charges. So she charges one person. It's usually not avoidable unless you're a mage or you have a TP like Spatial Rift. But the second one you can just run away and you won't take any damage and you'll dodge it, because you have enough time to do that. So if I remember correctly, then we just practically kill the boss and there's not much else happening. Aside for us using Mindbender into Necrolord and doing a bunch of damage to finish off the boss. So this is basically it. I just wanted to give you guys a quick rough look at it. Now if you guys like this, I might be making some more variations of this, because I actually kind of enjoy this. I've been pushing quite a bit right now, so I'm still learning a bunch of stuff. Right now I think my world rank is like 40 or something, and my alliance rank is like 7th or 8th, something like that. So it's a bunch of fun to do Mythic Plus dungeons, really what I like as opposed to the rest. And yeah, so this was at the start of the week, and yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoy my content, make sure you sub, like, and hit that bell button, and we'll see you in the next one, guys. See ya!